Hello, everyone. All right, I know it's early, but how many people hit the pong last night? A little too hard in this room. Anyway, I'm RJ with CRS. Welcome to our keynote with Curtis LeGeyt and Kurt Johnson. A couple reminders before we get started. If you haven't downloaded the CRS app yet, you should do so. It's a great roadmap to your week. Just go search CRS 2023 in the App Store, and you'll find it there. The Wi-Fi, if you haven't gotten that yet, it's CRS 2023, and then the password is connect. We're doing Q&A through the app, so if you have any questions throughout the session, you can tap them into the app, and we'll do a Q&A session at the end. Don't forget the Team UMG lunch at the Ryman. That's at noon, of course, being lunch. A short walk up the street in the cold. And right after this, we're going to have a session called Leading Through High-Functioning Anxiety, 3 p.m. Don't miss Radio and Records, Redefining the Relationship. And then at 7 o'clock in this room, Acoustic Alley, Bob Kingsley's Acoustic Alley, a great songwriting, storytelling session. And BMG, Lainey Wilson's Bell Bottom Music Celebration. That's in the Broadway hallway. All right, yeah, right? Coming in hot tonight at 9:30, BMG. Please welcome the moderator for this fireside chat, Town Square Media's Senior VP Programming and CRB President, Kurt Johnson.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming by. We have a great hour for you here. And I want to tell you a little bit about our keynote speaker this morning. Curtis LeGeyt is the chief advocate for broadcasters both in television and radio all over the United States. He's been in that role since January of 2022. Before that, he was the COO of the organization for 2 years, and before that was chief of government affairs. He does a lot of Washington. He knows it inside and out, and we'll learn a lot more about that today. I think he can really pull back the veil for you and explain how he advocates for us. During his time at NAB, he has advocated for several key legislation points that have benefited broadcasters. And when something comes up in the news, when something is misstated for radio, he's on it right away. He couldn't be a better advocate for us. Prior to joining NAB in 2011, he was senior counsel to then Senate Judiciary Chairman Patrick Leahy from Vermont. And he was an associate at Howry LLP, a law firm in Washington, D.C., where he worked with antitrust litigation, merger reviews. Obviously, a person who was well qualified and ready to step into the role as our advocate for country radio and all of radio. So please join me in welcoming Curtis LeGeyt. Good morning. All right. There's the microphone there. Glad to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Great event so far.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's just getting started. So, you do. I did most of your bio out here, so you didn't have to sit us and do this as your life. But a couple other things on you. You do some really cool things in addition to NAB. You're on the National Alliance for Suicide Prevention Executive Committee, the board of Tracy's Kids, which helps children with cancer, and the board of Musicians on Call, which is one of my favorite organizations. And people here at CRS are very involved in that and love that. So thank you, man. You and I met 5-6 years ago on Leadership Music here in Nashville, which was a great experience. And we were the two in the room. There were maybe 50 of us, and we were the ones who stood up for radio.
Well, the thing I love about Leadership Music, and it's the same reason that I wanted to make sure that I was here today for this event, is anytime you have the opportunity to get outside of Washington, D.C., where everything is adversarial, black and white, and get into an environment where you're thinking through how you can work together, whether it's across industries, across different political persuasions, in order to achieve something that's going to benefit the whole. That's something that I think is a really great use of time. And what was unique, I thought, about leadership music, and it's the same type of dialogue that you're having this week here in Nashville, is you're talking about how people from all different sides of the music industry, whether it's artists, songwriters, record labels, publishers, broadcasters, streaming services, can come together to grow the pie for everyone and ultimately benefit creativity and creators. So that's what I love about Nashville, and it's why I'm excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, it's a very unique event, and couldn't be more about what you represent. So let's dive into it here a little bit. What I love about watching you work and from knowing you before at Leadership Music is you are such an advocate for the power of local radio. Talk to me a little bit about a couple of examples of that where you've really championed that.
Well, if you think about where we are right now in terms of today's media landscape, I don't think the power of local radio could be any more important. You know, I think we could poll every person at this conference, and we would hear concerns about how the media is dividing us. We would hear concerns about misinformation on social media, and we would hear these concerns about where you can turn to just get the straight facts and to get a connection to the community in which you live. And local radio is providing all of that. And not to mention, we're doing it with an infrastructure that ensures that in times of natural disaster, and it feels like there are more of those year over year than what we were ever facing in the past, local radio's got the infrastructure to ensure that communities can use our service as a lifeline when cell towers go down, other forms of communication fail. So I couldn't be more compelled about what we are doing right now, because I think, frankly, the fact that all of you have boots on the ground in whatever community you might be servicing is just what's differentiating us from all the chatter. And really, I think we're the antidote to a lot of what is wrong out there, a lot of what's dividing us, a lot of what's misinforming us.
That's really at the core. And local radio, as we know well at Town Square and many of the other companies represented here, is the heartbeat of Bill, our CEO, says it all the time, is the heartbeat of the town.
Yeah, I think COVID was a really important reminder. You know, when push came to shove and ultimately, you know, the national narrative of what was going on from a health perspective became irrelevant to most people's lives, and what became very relevant was where am I going to go to get my vaccine? What are the rules of the road for my local business? What am I going to do about getting my kids educated? What's the school schedule? What's the conversation going on between teachers and parents? All of that was hyper-local, and that's why I think even in a moment where maybe, you know, our audience wasn't in their cars commuting to the same degree they might have been prior to 2020, our audience sustained because I think for trusted radio stations across the country, our listeners knew that they could tune in, get real-time information, and that was information that was going to make a real difference. And so I see that playing out now. I think the trust that was built and reinforced during a crisis, I certainly see from our audiences that there's a real carryover effect, and certainly from what I do day in and day out, which is policymaking in Washington, D.C., I think it was a really important reminder to legislators, to regulators at the FCC about the unique importance of our medium, and that's going to be lasting.
Love the way that you advocate on those points. Thank you. Let's dive into a really important issue for broadcasters, the connected car. We've talked about this a lot, and what is radio's opportunity as the dashboard becomes more of a computer and radio is a part of that, vital that people can easily access it? What do you see as the opportunities there?
I'm going to talk about the opportunity, but then I'm going to layer on the unique challenge that we face, which is, you know, the opportunity is very clear from the perspective of engaging with your audiences and engaging, frankly, with your advertisers, that the screen-driven experience that's only going to get larger and larger, that the automobile represents, just gives us more opportunity to engage. And whether that means, content beyond what's, just happening on your linear station, whether it means, opportunities to go to your business partners and to suggest an array of different tie-ins of how you can go further their connection to your audiences. Obviously, when it comes to songwriters, to performers, giving real ability to interact with that creator while they're listening to your song on the radio, there's infinite possibilities here. And frankly, every person in this room understands those possibilities better than I do because you're living it day in and day out. I think the challenge, though, is all the things that make radio great. The fact that there is such diversity on our airwaves. You've got thousands of different ownership groups across the country, all of whom are serving their audiences through what we call radio. That's a little more complicated than Apple Music or Spotify or SiriusXM that have a singular unified product, ultimately radio's product. And I'm a big believer that a rising tide lifts all ships and that any individual station is only going to be as high performing as the product of radio. That fragmentation presents some challenges as to what the uniform experience looks like for the listener in the car with all these innovations going on. And that's the unique role that I think NAB can serve here, is really trying to coalesce the industry behind one, I want to call it a listener experience, but in some ways it's beyond just a listener experience, audience experience in the car that is simple, that is consistent, but that both our audience and our advertisers know what they are getting. I think if we can achieve that, sky is the limit and provides us a lot of different opportunities that we don't have today to engage with our audiences.
Separate question. AM radio. Recently came up that several automakers, Ford, Tesla, BMW, Audi, I don't know if there are others, were looking at eliminating AM radio in the car. And you spoke very pointedly on that issue as regards radio in the car. What, 40 million, 50 million people listen every week to AM radio, and that's just AM radio in the car. What is AM radio's role in your view going forward, and what is the importance of that in the connected car?
Well, it's interesting because we deal with this in Washington constantly, and now I think you're seeing it carry over to some degree to our partners in the auto industry, which is there's just so much obsession with the bright, shiny object, what's coming down the pike, that I think it is really easy to take for granted the massive listenership that AM radio in particular still maintains. So you had the statistics right. By our latest studies, 47 million Americans still touch AM radio every week. That is a number that any one of these what I would call popular streaming services would bend over backwards to achieve. Yet it's a bit taken for granted. And I think it is very short-sighted on the part of the auto manufacturers to even consider dropping this service from their car. But in fairness, again, back to the fragmentation of our industry, this is one industry in radio that oftentimes struggles with speaking with a unified voice. Another industry, the auto industry, similarly fragmented, also oftentimes struggles speaking with a unified voice. And so this is a place where we need to do our jobs. And there's a few components to that. One, NAB has really stepped up. My colleague, April Carty-Sipp, is in the audience and spearheads a committee of broadcasters who are interfacing with the auto industry, because I think working through some of the issues with AM radio that the automakers have flagged requires having a one-stop shop to get some answers from our industry. And so we need to do a better job speaking with a unified voice, and we're doing that. But the second is, what are we speaking with a unified voice for? Ensuring these automakers are informed as to the ongoing consumer demand for AM radio. When you've got those statistics in front of you, the case for maintaining this service, because we know consumers care and it will influence their buying decisions, is a significant one. Secondarily, there are some new interference issues that have been presented by electric vehicles. Very easy for the automakers to put up their hands and say, oh, it's a little bit too difficult to deal with AM radio, but there's a million different audio services out there. No one will miss AM. I think we need to step up and ensure that the automakers have those technological solutions at their fingertips. And then the third piece of this, frankly, is the fact that Washington cares about this. There are few industries more regulated than the auto industry. They are obviously in the business of consumer safety with everything that's going on with autonomous vehicles. I'm not sure they can afford a moment here to feel as if they are on the other side of public safety. That is really our backbone. It's why Senator Ed Markey sent a letter to every one of the major automakers, really prodding them on this. Amplifying the role that local broadcasting plays in times of emergency. We're the backbone of the emergency alerting system. That system starts with AM radio stations, then amplify those messages across the country. 6 former FEMA administrators have written to the Department of Transportation and said AM radio is critical during a tornado, a hurricane, an earthquake. And so I think the case is a very clear one. We've just got to make sure the automakers hear it, and we're doing that.
And your radio sometimes has a tough time speaking as one, and you help us do that. Thank you. Washington being so divided, you see support on both sides for that?
I absolutely see support on both sides of the aisle for, are you asking specifically about AM?
Let's pivot a little bit into the broader issue of where does radio fit into technology and all the different challenges, AM radio being one of them, the connected car and all of that. Where does radio fit into that, and how are you generating support?
Well, I want to speak to your Washington question, which is I think that broadcast radio is, frankly, unique amongst industries in that we don't register Democrat or Republican. We register local. And I can tell you can draw a direct line, and I say this with the caveat that I love all of my members, but you can draw a direct line to the quality of the local stations in a member of Congress's district, whether they are Republican or Democrat, and the degree to which they line up with us in support of us on our policy issues. And that is irrespective of whether it's a member of Congress who represents an urban area, a rural area, whether they are on the East Coast or the Midwest, or whether those station groups are larger station groups or smaller ones. If there's a commitment to boots on the ground local where the on-air personalities have a real authentic connection to audiences, and the stations that are reporting news are investing in investigative journalism and putting real time into that reporting, those members of Congress support us because they see the real difference it makes in their communities. And so we are fortunate to have support on every one of the issues where we advocate for from Republicans and Democrats. I think that carries over to these latest conversations around the future of radio in the car, and I'm confident that radio is going to remain a staple in the car, irrespective of whatever the press narrative may be right now. But there's so much conversation in Washington around big tech, the impact that it's having on our discourse, the impact it's having on democracy. There's so much conversation around, cable news, the politicization, and I think our sweet spot is our connection with communities, the fact that we come through in times of disaster. Members of Congress understand all of that.
So, shifting gears just a little bit, we're here in Nashville, and this is the Country Radio Seminar, which is all about music and artists and songwriters. And within 10 miles of us right now, there are 100 songs being written. It's what happens. This is Music City. Let's shift gears and talk about something that's very important to a lot of people attending CRS, and that is the, I want to get the name of it right, the Local Radio Freedom Act. And this is about the performance fee, the performance tax. I don't want to get political and start naming things, but the fee that would be charged to radio for playing songs. So there are big arguments, and in leadership music we discussed it heavily.
Yep.
Where does NAB stand on that, and what, in your view, is what should be done and where that should go?
Well, let me give a quick primer for those in the audience who might not be familiar with the issue. You know, for decades, broadcasters and other services that play music have had to secure and pay royalties to the songwriters who created that music. In the 1990s, as some of the new streaming services, satellite radio, were coming into existence, Congress created a new legal framework to govern that particular type of music play, and that included an additional royalty to performers. Broadcasters, as everyone in this room is aware, have long had a relationship with the performance community, free airplay for free promotion, and that is a legal framework that broadcasters have grown up around, built businesses around, and that has benefited the performance community for decades. There is a lobbying effort underway to impose a new additional performance fee that those streaming services are paying onto broadcast radio stations as well. And look, we have fought that hard because the reality here is we're providing a free service. None of those streaming or satellite services are doing that. One that is completely locally focused. And the business model just simply doesn't exist for it if you continue to pile on new fees. All of that having been said, I'm not sure there's an industry in this country more invested in a vibrant and viable ecosystem for performers to create songs than the broadcast industry. You know, there is a reason that broadcasters all across the country are breaking new artists every day, and they're not just breaking those artists that have a national profile. They are delivering a unique connection to those artists who are in your communities. There's not a place that's, I think, a better example of that than Nashville. And so we want to ensure that this system and the way that performers are compensated works for everyone. We've heard very, very clearly that the current legal framework doesn't work for everyone. And so we're ready to roll up our sleeves and figure this out. And if there is a system that we can put in place here that ensures more dollars go to the pockets of the performers themselves, frankly, more dollars go to the songwriters, rather than it being steered towards intermediaries, we're all for that conversation. And we're all for the notion that we need to be part of that solution, but let's ensure it's a solution that grows the pie for everyone, ensures more airplay for performers, and doesn't ultimately undermine our business in a very short-sighted attempt to get a few dollars out of radio. So that's what we are fighting for, but make no mistake, it's a huge issue. The record labels have enlisted Joe Crowley, who's a former member of House Democratic leadership, to lead their fight on this. I respect greatly the message that they are pounding day in and day out in Washington, D.C., and I want to see them come to the negotiating table and figure this out together, because I think we can do this in a way that's a win-win for broadcasters and performers.
Do you sense that we're moving toward that type of discussion, or is it really, are people entrenching?
I think people have entrenched. And, you know, one of the things that happens, and it's not unique to our issues, one of the things that happens in Washington when any one party controls all of the levers of policymaking is that it's very easy to entrench in the hope that you will just get your way and not have to compromise. And my sense is that was the dynamic last Congress around this issue. Even though I wouldn't characterize it as a political issue, it had a lot of those ingredients. I do think divided government and the fact that you've had some changes in who's holding gavels is going to put a little bit more pressure on broadcasters and on the performing community to try to find a middle ground, because I'm not sure there's a formula for getting legislation done in Washington, D.C., where there's not that sense of compromise. And I think the members of Congress who have been most invested in this, Darrell Issa, Jerry Nadler, certainly are have been advocates for the performers' view on this issue. But I think that even they would like to see some sort of a deal here. So we're going to be working on that. And that brings me back to your question, which is our leverage in this conversation is the significant support that we have from legislators in Washington, D.C., who don't want to see any new fee imposed on local radio stations because they understand the degree to which it will undermine our service. So, last Congress, we had 250 members of Congress, House and Senate, Republican, Democrat, signed on to the Local Radio Freedom Act. It's a resolution where a member puts its name saying, I will not support any new performance royalty on radio. That is our way of demonstrating to both the recording industry and their supporters that the one-sided legislation that they're pushing doesn't have a path in Congress. What it doesn't do is get you to a compromise. And so that's our leverage. We need to continue to rebuild that sponsorship this Congress. We've already got 20 senators and 160 members of the House on it this Congress. So, we're out of the gates pretty strong here, 2 months into a new legislative session. But I think all of that is just the ingredients to sitting at the table and see if there's a way to do this that's viable for local radio, but ensures the vitality of the performance community.
You're a popular guy. You have a lot of people in Washington looking to you in one way or another, right? Thank you for advocating on that and trying to find a solution that works for everyone. I think that's one of the things that makes you the right person for this job right now. Is there's so many factors that you brought up, and you're climbing over them and finding ways to bring people to the table, and that's good for everybody. One of the things we talk about in radio, we're having digital sessions. We had our digital summit yesterday. Attracting new talent. This kind of all falls into the inclusion discussion. It's vital to have a thriving industry, to have dynamic and exciting new talent. We awarded our Rusty Walker scholarships yesterday to some great young future broadcasters who are very excited about the business. But like in many industries, finding good people, it is a constant challenge, and the unemployment rate is low. But attracting new talent that will be the lifeblood of the business going forward. What role does NAB play in that, and what thoughts do you have on that?
NAB has to play a significant role in this, because I think we are the best nationwide messenger of what it means to be a local broadcaster. And, from where I sit, you have this new generation who is expecting more out of their employer. We see this at NAB, and I know every one of you sees this in your business day in and day out. And to the degree that we are really presented as stewards of the community, anchored in public service, trusted information, bringing people together rather than dividing them, to me, that is a cause people can get behind. And I think NAB, we are already, but you're going to see a continuous ramp up in the role that we are playing of delivering that message in a nationwide way. And also, connecting, yes, with universities, and we do a lot of that. We've got relationships both at the NAB level as well as through many of our partner state associations with journalism schools across the country. But frankly, this is broader than just journalism and media. It's also where are you getting your engineers? Where are you getting your salespeople? And I think there's a lot more that can be done, not just for 22, 23-year-olds, but also mid-career folks who have garnered expertise in their profession and are looking for a transition, come to broadcast. Give yourself some purpose. Take that engineering degree and use it to serve your local community. Take that experience with every one of your local businesses and bring it to sell at our local stations and ensure that your communities have a lifeline in times of disaster. I think that is very much going to be our calling card. I want to also speak to, though, what you referenced with regard to inclusion, because I think that is a more complicated topic. And it certainly dovetails with recruitment, but it is larger than just recruitment, and there is a lot that NAB is doing to lead for the industry when it comes to DE&I. So, the first is a lot of what we've already talked about here, that when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to executive training, our leadership foundation, the NABLF, I think is really the gold standard in training programs that can help identify candidates who have excelled in one line of the business and can give them a broader exposure to other facets of the broadcast business so that they can advance throughout their companies. We also have, hyper-specific tracks on sales training, technology training, but the reality is I think there is a lot that we can be doing as an industry to ensure that we are training the next generation of diverse leaders, and NAB is really stepping into that. I'm a big believer that broadcasters are only going to be as successful as the degree to which we reflect the diversity of the communities we serve, and we're working that. But there's a couple of other elements to this. Ownership, we have been pushing for years for the FCC to reinstate, it will take congressional action, a tax certificate program that incentivizes station sales to diverse ownership groups. Similarly, we are working with key lawmakers on solutions to enable more access to capital for diverse would-be owners, female owners, who maybe don't have the relationships with lenders that it takes to get your foot into the industry. And then finally, I know we're here to talk about music, but I don't think we can understate the role that radio plays on reporting on events that are going on in our community, and increasingly those that have real racial sensitivities around them. And NAB has devoted tremendous resources to creating resources, toolkits. We've got an entire awareness in reporting initiative to ensure that the way that we are reporting on those types of events accurately portrays them in a way that promotes inclusivity rather than reinforcing stigmas, creating divisions. And so there's a lot here in terms of the role radio needs to play when it comes to recruiting the next generation of talent and also ensuring that we are servicing our very diverse communities. That may mean something very different in Nashville than in the Rocky Mountains, but all of these are things we're committed to right now.
A good time to, and by the way, RJ, I think, is collecting questions. RJ, just let us know if there are good ones. We don't want to let good questions get away from us. While he's collecting those, this kind of pivots into your advocacy efforts for various groups. Any new ones that we should know about, or other things that we haven't touched on here?
To me, we're going to spend time talking about the performance royalty issue. We're going to spend time talking about, the latest at the FCC. That is always going to be something that NAB is in the headlines over, because certainly our regulator keeps us very, very busy. But the big picture existential issue for the entire media space, but I would say broadcasters in particular, is the impact of the big tech platforms on our business. And if you think about these companies not only as gatekeepers to our audiences when we are trying to reach them online, but also as competitors in the local advertising space as well as the local audience space, Washington needs to figure out a way to rein this in. And we've been part of all of these conversations in Washington, D.C. We are big supporters of a bill that made it to the 1-yard line last Congress. And now we are recalibrating a bit along with some of our partners on next steps, the Journalism Competition Preservation Act. What that bill would do is give broadcasters some antitrust immunity to collectively negotiate with these tech platforms for not just the terms when our content is accessed through those platforms, but also the way in which our content is presented on those platforms. Today we are so reliant on Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon to reach our audiences in the digital space that we can't walk away from them, yet we're not receiving anything close to fair market compensation. At times, and I represent a broad tent in the broadcast industry, this is thought of as more of a TV issue, but I would say to everyone in this room that you're all in the business of connecting your local personalities, your local content with audiences in every way that you can engage them. Yes, that is your linear radio station, but it's also the podcast, your website, a daily blog, a newsletter, and getting your local personalities out in their communities. We understand, and we're hearing from you day in and day out, the various ways that radio has transformed well beyond just that dial in your car. All of this engagement relies on these tech platforms to reach your people. And so this legislation and other bills that we will be pushing to support is simply meant to give a little bit of a counterweight to their market power, the degree to which they can impact your business, and ensure that if audiences are consuming your content, you can be fairly compensated. So I think that that is the elephant in the room here, and I'm not sure it can be solved in today's climate in Washington, D.C. Politicians in both parties have decided to use big tech as a bit of a punching bag rather than actually solve some of these core underlying issues. But I think we will get there. There's bipartisan interest in not only reining in big tech, but also helping all of you. And so that's going to be a major, major focus of ours, not just this Congress, but going forward until we've ensured there's a viable business model for radio.
Well, thank you. Well said. RJ, any questions? Oh.
I'm going to assume it was a bad question since
This is
the mic's turned
right.
off.
Wow, it must have been a tough one.
You want mine?
I'm sorry. Oh,
Okay, now
now it's on, and it's really on. Sorry. Curtis, thank you again for being here at CRS this year. We're so pleased to have you. So not surprisingly, there are a couple questions about technology, all right? And going back to the connected car, someone in the audience is saying, when you consider the possibility of engaging listeners in the car, are you cognizant of the safety considerations involved with potentially distracting the driver? This seems to be question number one every time we bring up the connected car. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's a huge problem. I mean, as someone who has 3 kids and visualizes a world in which they're getting behind the wheel, I'm terrified by all of the distractions that are in the car. We already see the impact that smartphones are having on safety on the roads, and I think all of this is only going to exacerbate it. I'm not sure we can get away from those realities. Obviously, the car makers are investing major, major dollars in improving public safety, putting safeguards in place that will shut down those forms of media when drivers taking their eyes off the road. There's a lot to unpack here, but the short answer is yes, I'm concerned about it, and I think radio is a part of that solution, right? Which is, again, we are anchored in public safety. And I don't mean this simply in times of disaster, but relative to every medium that is out there, we're also the medium that relies least on interactive engagement when you are in the automobile. So I think all of that is a plus for public safety. I think there is a renewed nationwide awareness of all of these safety concerns, and that radio can really capitalize on that. So, we're talking a lot about the benefits that the screen-based experience can provide in terms of our engagement with audiences that is new and above and beyond anything we've seen in the past. But it shouldn't lose sight of the fact that our core competency is the fact that, we've got DJs, local personalities, making all those programming choices for the listener rather than requiring them to do it themselves.
And another one, and this is a hot topic at CRS this year, the topic of AI. We discussed this a little bit backstage before. Does the NAB or you personally have any thoughts or observations or position on that's very new technology, but it's really, it's a buzz right now, and it's hitting the critical mass. In terms, and specifically the conversation this morning earlier about DJs, AI, and all that.
I think if you are a performer, if you are a DJ, if you are a journalist, if you are a media personality, AI should concern you greatly. And while there are a number of cases pending in the courts right now that I think will give us some degree of a roadmap as to how our legal protections that we, to some degree, take for granted apply in the AI space, I think there's no doubt that Congress is going to have some work to do here to ensure that our trusted local personalities are protected in a world in which their images and likeness, their voices can easily be misappropriated. And so that's going to be a major focus of ours going forward. Again, there are still some unresolved legal questions that I think will give us clarity as to what work lies ahead, to prevent some of the major problems. I mean, no doubt these technologies, like so many others, offer an enormous array of benefits to our companies, to our audiences, if we can harness them in the right creative ways. But certainly there are some major dangers here as well.
Thank you. Kurt?
A force for good or not, right? Amazingly powerful. Yes. Fascinating times we live in. The NAB is coming up on 100 years, right? And we like to say radio is the original social media. And we talk about it often, that our company, the name, Town Square, comes from that very concept. So you've got the NAB coming up. Any special celebrations planned or things we should look forward to?
Yeah, so thank you for teeing this up. This year marks the 100th anniversary both of the National Association of Broadcasters as well as our trade show out in Las Vegas. Very, very proud of the history that we have being at the center of all of the innovation that has gone on in the broadcast industry over the course of the last century. And so you're going to see a celebration of that. In Las Vegas that week, we are doing a large centennial celebration. But one of the things that our public affairs team has put together that I'm really excited about is the ability to go on our website and tell your story. And this is something that our membership is really engaging on. And if you look at the tools on our website, we've got a separate Centennial website off of our NAB.org launch page where you can go on, you can see interactively a history of NAB and the broadcast industry, the interrelation, layering on our show. And what we've asked broadcasters across the country to do is upload their own stories as to their experiences alongside all of that to really personalize it. So we are going to be bringing all of that to life at that show. We do a big event in Washington, D.C. in June with our foundation, our Service to America. We've got a secondary show in New York in the fall, and you're going to see all of these as touch points where we're going to offer some real opportunities to recognize not just that history, but also how that history positions us to innovate going forward because of the unique connection that we have with our communities. So we're excited.
Congratulations. I'm excited to see what you roll out. Curtis, thank you for spending some time with us this morning. I think you can see, You have somebody who's very engaged and very on top of and has a finger on the pulse of all the things that are going on, all in the middle of the magic that is Washington, D.C. So thank you for what you do, and thanks for coming to see us at CRS. Curtis, LeGeyt.
Happy to do it. Congratulations on a great conference.